Go ahead.
So in Memdalet, we basically learn about the Sirufim and the Chilukim, and we learned that the actual separation into letters, in other words, the actual ability to put the thing into letters, which really came from a tziruf rather than a chiluk, because the main thing is to put it together. But nonetheless, it's the ability to put the thought into letters, comes from a higher place than the actual power of thinking itself. And that's basically the Indian of the Levush Chashmal. The Levush Chashmal is basically the Indian of the letters. That to put the thought into a thing that can be Chashmal. I saw someplace that it's made up of two roots: Chash, which means to feel, and Mal, which means to talk.
Right, so, Chashmal. Chash means silence.
Chash also means kush, to feel.
Yeah, to feel also, yeah.
To feel, which is I don't think I don't think the main thing is silence. I read it that it means the two things, that to feel and to talk. In other words, it puts the idea in a way that it can be felt.
Right.
In other words, the mind cannot really feel the idea without putting it into words. That's why really, in a way, an animal can basically also have all the kind of ideas that we have. But yet it cannot feel them. That's why it doesn't have a da'at, like we do. In other words, it can never get it to a point where he can think about it philosophically, for instance.
Right.
Even though...
can't crystallize the thoughts.
Yeah, but why? Because really...
Because he has no words.
Because he has no words. Because otherwise, if you see like a dog has problems, you know,
right,
and you see they worry and stuff. You see dogs worry and they cry and they're happy and you know they long for them. You know, like when the people are gone, the dog is to sit there and they're very sad and stuff like that. You know, and they have all kinds of problems in their life. And you see they're curious about things, and yet they can't put it into like an actual thought of a Hitbonenut. The reason why is because they can't put it into words.
Right.
So therefore they can't feel the idea. So even though they know that they're sad about certain things, but it never gets to a point that they can think, why is it like this? Why is the world like this? Why me? Why is the world mistreating me? Why? I mean, is there anything I can do about it? Am I doing something wrong? Why? Because it can't put it into words, so he can't really feel the idea. He just has the idea, but he has all the ideas of the emotions. Right. You know, not only that, in a way you can see that he even has an idea of Bina, like it says, Bina Lavkin Ben Yom Ben Laila. Like you see that animals know, like they know, for instance, to go upwind and downwind from their prey.
Right.
They know that, like, you know, when you go to the water hole, you got to watch out for the lion. I mean, you know, you see there's some kind of a hafchana of Bina that they know things that's not even like an emotional thing. That's a thing that you know. That's a seichel. And yet they can't progress past that, even though, like, you see that certain animals, in some ways, they're pretty smart. And in some ways, you see certain animals are almost as smart as a little child, and yet they can't think. Like a child can already think certain thoughts, which an animal can't.
Right.
And it seems like, according to their intelligence, they should be able to think at least, like, minor philosophical thoughts, you know.
Right.
And yet they can't. The reason why is they can't feel the idea. They can't put the idea in a way that they can actually grasp it and hold on to it and play with it.
Right.
Why? Because they can't put it into the letters. They can't put it into the letters of the Hashmal.
Right.
You know, and another thing is, Mal is like milu mila. They said it. If you can't put it into letters, you can't say it. You can't say the idea without putting it into letters. So that's what Hashmal is the power to put a thought into letters, to put a concept into letters. And then you can feel it, and you can think it over. And this is also one of the reasons why they have small advancements, like monkeys make little tiny tools and stuff like that, but it's nothing, it's just by trial and error. They can't think. In other words, a person can sometimes come up with a whole new idea without actually trying anything, but just by thinking about it.
Right.
Because he can put it into words and then play with the idea. So what he basically said is that the source of the Hashmal, which the Hashmal is basically the Indian of Levushim, really. The Hashmal of Noiga, like he says now.
Right.
But really the source of the Hashmal is higher than the lights themselves.
Right.
והנה כתיב ויעש השם לאדם לאשתו כותנס אור וילבישם שזהו בחינת החשמל דנויגה שמקף לזון דאצילות שנקרא אדם ואשתו עד מתחת רגליהם חולו כידוע ותרוס של רב מאיר היה כתוב אור באלף שזהו בחינת זיהר העילה כמו שנאמר אור כסלמה שזהו אחר בירורם דרפא חולו. In other words, by him the Torah was already after the birurim. מתחילה יש להבין קצת בביור עניין השביר והתיקון בכללוסן. So now we have to understand the עניין of the shvir and the tikun. שהוא בבחינת האויסי שנקרא עם כלים שנשברו ונפלו מצד ריבוי האויר שלא היה ביכולתם להאכיל כמו שמובא בעץ חיים. In other words, when you tell somebody an idea that's too high for them, or too big of an idea and has too much light, it'll break apart into a bunch of nonsense. And the perfect example is Chassidus. Like you see what happened with Kabbalah and Chassidus, like you see, look on the internet and you'll see what happened with it.
Right.
It turned into all kinds of total nonsense. They've taken it and turned it up, worse than upside down. And then if you look outside, like these people, like the Berg people and people who, or like the Hermetic people, that they've tried to study some of these Kabbalistic things, and they've taken the idea, since the idea had too much light in it, it got broken up into total nonsense. And that's the basic thing of the Shvira. That the Kalim, because there was too much light, that they couldn't hold this much light, so they broke up.
Right.
Whereas a small idea which doesn't have a lot of light, like if I tell somebody, to boil water, you put it on the fire and you wait till it starts bubbling. So, by some people even that'll break up, But by most people, there's not that much light in that idea, and they'll be able to take that idea and it won't break up. Or any simple idea, like if you teach somebody how to hammer a nail or something like that, But
right.
When the idea gets very big, like for instance, like you see in little kids when in the first grades, when they teach them like history and stuff like that, or mathematics, sometimes, like they have these shows, things that kids say.
Right.
Like a link letter or something like that.
A link letter.
Yeah, and they come out with all these funny things that kids,
right.
mix up the whole thing, because like when they first learn it, it's like the idea is too big for them, so they mix it up.
Right.
So that's the Indian here. Because there was too much light, the Kalim couldn't hold it, like it says in Etz Chaim. you prioritize, what do you call that? To pulverize, yeah, like the yam. The yam is malchus. In other words, that the dibur, that the words got mixed up. That the letters got all separated out. You know, pirurim is like, you know, when a little kid takes bread or a cookie and turns it into crumbs. Crumbles it up. You crumbled up the ocean.
Right.
And this is what's called the shviras hakelim. The time adobri adu al derech mashal oimek oy sechel shelamala mikli hagbolas hamayach az vada yitbabalu oisis hasechel shed machshava mitzad mir koicham vahachel al er kirav. And that's basically what we're talking about. That when there's a very big idea that's higher than the brain being able to contain it, the letters of thought get mixed up. It all becomes into a big bilbul. Because he can't hold it in the words of the seichel. Kirabhu mehem, because the light is too much for them to hold. Masha enken kli hamoyach shemachil lo era seichel ha'amak adraba mugbal midyasha v'nelam ba'isis what is it, halazu or halalu?
Halalu.
Oh, here it says halalu. So when the letters actually do contain a seichel, it's just the opposite. Then the seichel really becomes midyashav dafka through the oisius. In other words, like in other words, you say, well, since such a big seichel gets all mixed up because you can't put it in letters, like people say, like for instance, what we're talking about now. We're talking about godliness, because Chassidus is not really about the Seder Hishtalshelut. Kabbalah is about the Seder Hishtalshelut. But we're not really learning Kabbalah. We're really learning Chassidus. If you look in Yanish Torah Chassidus, you know, the famous Sikha of the Rebbe, the Yanish Torah Chassidus is God himself, not the Seder Hishtalshelut.
Right.
And the basic thing here is that it's a marshal on a marshal on a marshal. And finally, the subject of Kabbalah becomes also a marshal.
Right.
It's not really the subject of Chassidus. The subject of Chassidus is a whole different subject than the subject of Kabbalah. The subject of Kabbalah is the Hishtalshelut Hailamas. The subject of Chassidus is really not the Hishtalshelut Hailamas. That's why we started before the symptom. In Kabbalah, you don't start before the symptom. Because we're really talking about the Eibishter. So the basic thing is that, and this is the big taina that everybody has to this, is that the Eibishter is such a big light that it cannot be contained in words.
Right.
And that's basically one of the things that also you'll see besides in Yiddishkeit, Lahavdil, and all the Goyishkeit, they say it can only be experienced, it cannot be said.
Right.
And that's, of course, what he's saying here is that that's a very big mistake. Because the fact that the oyer, when the oyer is not contained in letters, it cannot be felt. Then it's like a dog. But he doesn't really have an actual das. That's not a das, it's havaya. You don't know the Eibishter. In order to know the Eibishter, or anything, it dafka has to be in letters. And when it can be put into letters, it's dafka the opposite. Then it's dafka mukbal.
Go ahead, Yossi.
Yeah, it dafka fanet means gets taken in. It's taken in by the letters. And not only that, the actual thing is that the person takes it into himself dafka through the letters. and not in a way of like direct chokhmah. In other words, that's the whole thing that they're saying, is to have that the das should go straight from chokhmah, because, and in other words, like we've talked about this, like what it says in chapter 1, what their mistake is. Their mistake is to have das directly into the chokhmah. But why? And here's the reason why. The reason why is because the Hitchalkus Ha'oisis of Bina will not be able to accept such a high light, because this light is too high.
Right.
And he's saying, but Adraba, just the opposite. Is Dafka, when you take it into letters, that's when you can take it in. Otherwise, you can't really take it in. V'kasher lo yachilu, but when the letters don't contain the light, then they have to basically get separate. In other words, it explodes.
Right.
The whole thing becomes, instead of a yishuv, it becomes a big bilbul. And the fact that it gets put into letters actually makes it an even bigger bilbul than not being put into letters. So that, like, what a person that just says, well, there's a God in the world, and doesn't try to understand any farther, actually has less of a bilbul than the Hermetic Kabbalists, for instance, or the people who go to the Brook Center. They have a bigger bilbul.
Right.
The whole big bilbul. Like, you notice, a normal person, he's like a simple guy. He never tried to put all of these things into words.
Right.
And he has a simple emunah in the Eibishter, and he knows he has to do the mitzvahs, and he has to be a good Jew.
Right.
So there's no bilbul.
Right.
Of course, he doesn't really have it in a way, like, in a deeper way, but nonetheless, there's no bilbul.
Right.
And you see that it's Dafka the people that are trying to get it in a deeper way, that have tried to study things like Zohar and things like that. Dafka, by them, there's a fantastic bilbul.
Right.
That was the whole thing what happened with Shabtai Tzvi. And the Frankists, there was a big bilbul. As long as everybody stayed with just simple little, like just do the halacha and be a good boy and don't try to understand too much.
Right.
Everything is fine. And it's Dafka whenever people try to get into the deeper dimension of the Torah, that it almost invariably ended up into a big bilbul. This actually contains the atmos of the Oyer and Seif. Not just the atmos of the Oyer and Seif, but mamish the atmos. It actually contains it in these letters.
Right.
That's the thing about, that's what this is. When it says that when Adraba, Mugbal, Mayushav, and Nelam, Ba'osis, Halalu, these are the letters that he's talking about. It's Fanems, huh?
Halalu.
Halalu, right. That it's Fanemt, this book actually takes in the Yichud of the Eibishter. Whereas in the other things, the light is too big milahachil, and therefore they exploded. The Matzayu exploded.
Right.
וכאשר לא יכילו, אז בהכרח שיתפדו האיסיס, וכמו שמור מוקם אחר בריחוד, שזהו כמו בטבע אחת, שתקצר להכיל העיר הרב שבה, יתפדו האיסיס שבה, אנה ואנה, עד שלא יהיה מובן מזה כלום. It'll become a bilbul till you don't understand nothing from it. כתבת ויאמר, שלא יאכל עמק המקוון שבוי, שלא יאכיל עמק המקוון שבוי, when it will not be able to contain the עמק which is מקוון in it. יתפרדו העתיד, ואיש הרבוב מהם שבוי מפורדים שלא כסדרם במקיימם. And then you don't know what it means. There's a vav and there's a yud. You have no idea you don't know what it means.
Right.
כדוגמת איסיס יהור ליבו שמאיים שמתפעדים שלא במקומם שלא כסיתם בחלומות.
Right.
And this is what it says. B'shuv Hashem et Shiva Tzion Ainu k'cholmin. That it's like a cholam. That the golus is like marshaled after a cholam.
Right.
That all the letters are there, but everything is mixed up. שבאים רק מצירופים שמהרהר ביום בלתי מסודרים, אלא אית מציבה זו ואית מציבה אחרת כולו. Like a jumble, you know those jumbles that they have?
Right.
ולקח החלומת שב ידברו, כמו שמבוא במקום אחר. And that's why the chaloimis talks a bunch of nonsense, unless you know how to put them together. It's like I put the chaloimis. That he knows how to put the letters back together properly. V'zeu apirur, and this is the crumbling. Shenikra, this v'zeu apirur, this crumbling. Nikra shvira l'chalokim rabim uktanim. It breaks it up into a bunch of little pieces. And this is basically the thing, like you see in Chassidus, the way that people understand Chassidus, they don't understand it as a coherent whole.
Right.
But rather in a bunch of little tiny points. That's what it says, Olam HaNekuda. There's a point here and a point there. They have no idea how the points go together. Ki bevei zeh ha'oich nitpar la'atzma b'mokam acher, when this particular thing that got crumbled up comes in another place, ein bo rak chelik mitzumtzam ma'id min ha'seichel she'ha mekubad yeis ha'teva b'tziruf ha'bishleimus kulu. וגם הוא מתפרר פירור אחר פירור. עד שנעשה מזה עניין זר לגמרי. Till it becomes a whole total opposite thing. And that's the pirur. That's the Indian of that's the real Indian of the Shviras HaKelim. That they took, it's basically the original idea is the correct idea.
Right.
You know. But by the time it was a pirur acha pirur, it turned into a totally opposite thing from the original kavanah. Kadugmat inyan halayim is meir liba shabayim. Rak afal pikin lo yachlam pila bekuba de machta. But nonetheless, he's not going to think elephant going through the eye of a needle. Rak me'ein hirhure libo dafka. But it'll be just like the hirhure libo dafka. And in I think it's Tavshin Chet, the Mittler Rebbe says, Apila bekupa de machta, where can you have such a thing? Only in a dream.
Right.
No, it's not Tavshin Chet. It's, I don't remember what year. It's Balayla Ahu Nadad Ashnas HaMelech.
Right.
It explains that the whole thing of the Golus and why the Golus got to this kind of crazy point is the Indian of Pila Bekupa de Machta. That where could a Pila Bekupa de Machta? Where could you have this Indian of Pila Bekupa de Machta? Dafka in a dream, but not in a regular dream, because he says, like he's saying here, in a regular dream you can't have a Pila Bekupa de Machta.
Right.
Only when you have like a total nightmare.
Right.
Where it's totally crazy. There you can have a Pila Bekupa de Machta. In other words, he explained that the whole reason of Golus and why the king had to sleep and stuff like that is to have the Indian of the Pila Bekupa de Machta, which, again, this here thing is a Pila, the giant thing, going, by the way, this Pila Bekupa de Machta is very much this Indian of the Shviras HaKelim. It says, when the thing is too big to go into the little thing.
Right.
You know, the Shvira comes when the light is too big to go into the Keli.
Right.
That's the Indian of a Pila Bekupa de Machta. If you try to fit a Pila Bekupa de Machta, it'll blow it up.
Right.
But he says there's two inyanim. One thing is that a Pila cannot go into Kupa de Machta, because when the light is too big, then it won't be able to contain it. But on the other hand, it's dafka in the letters. When the light is contained in the letters, dafka, then it's mityasher. And that's why it says in another place that where can a pila go b'kupa d'machta is dafka in a dream. And that's the whole inyan of this book here, is that you're putting the Eibishter into 78 pages.
Right.
Kach yuva l'mayla. What does it say, inyan?
The Indian.
The inyan, shviras hakelem, the eres t'toihu. Shezeh b'chinat piru u'pizah oisya shalahem. In other words, the lights of Toihu didn't break.
Right.
They just went back up. Not only that, the lights of Toihu are true. They're true lights.
Right.
They're true holy lights. What happened is that the problem was that they were too big for the Kalim, and the Kalim was a whole Pirur and Pizur, until finally ended up with witchcraft and Avodah Zarah and all kinds of things like that. Because they got mixed up, they fell farther and farther down until it became into total shmutz. That this is the sherish of the coming into being of the lavush of chashmal. וידוע דאויר זה הן בחינס מן האיסיאס זה מחשב דיבור מייסה ששורש המאיסיאס דקלם דתויהו שנתפרו וידו למטה ונעשה בחינת לבוש ומקיף להלבש לבחינס המידוס דאדם until the midos of Adam are malubash with these lavush chashmal. The midos, the characters of people, are made up from these mistaken ideas.
Right.
Like, for instance, like the terrorists or the Palestinians are made up from these broken up letters of Toihu. Their whole, it's their idea of life.
Right.
The whole idea of life is like this. That is, the whole idea of life is football.
Right.
So this is the basic inyan of the Shviras HaKelim of Toihu. The real inyan of Toihu is, you see it right here, right now.
Right.
The real inyan of Toihu is, you see, and not only that, these letters of Chashmal, you know, like it talks about demons that are making wars and making all kinds of things happen.
Right.
Like there's demons running around putting ideas in Palestinians' heads.
Right.
It's Chashmal.
Sure.
They're made up from letters.
Right.
And the thing is that they actually have like a partzuf.
Right.
That you could make up. You have, you know, it's a whole partzuf made up from 10 spheros.
Right.
You know, and the same thing, like, for instance, like you say, like, well, what do you mean? Like, in the old days, or some people could actually see those demons. What they look like. Yeah.
Right.
Same thing like we talked about the other day. I just heard about it. I just heard about it on the CD that you gave me. That, you know, in the letters of the DNA, you could actually see what a person looks like.
Right.
You know. So the same thing with these demons. There's actual demons running around whispering in these Meshuggah Arabs' ears to go and blow things up.
Right.
You know, and they're made up of Chashmal from the Shviras HaKelim of Toihu. So it's Malbish, this Chashmal from the breaking of the three letters, Machshava Dibur Maisa, that are that become the makifin to enclose the midos of a person, means that they make up the characteristics of, like they said, Edom, Moav,
Right.
By Edom it was murder, by Moav it was lust, by Yishmael it was stealing, right? Something like that.
Right.
When David came to give him the Torah.
Right.
וגם שהוא נייסה בבחינת לבוש נפרד, שוישה מלמעלה, and even though this Chashmal is Lavush Nifran, its upper source, Mimikor HaMoichin the Bina Shavmiday. It's really, the Sheirish of it is, it's higher than the Makar of the Meichin of Bina and the Midos. Shezeu Gamkin Tchinat Chitzonius Bina Shal Gozolov Yirachev L'Shmira, that this is also, the Sheirish of it is in Chitzonius Bina. In other words, it becomes from the Bechain of Bina, when it comes into the Midos, then the Bechain can take on a life of itself, but really it has another Sheirish, even higher than Bina and the Makifin of Bina itself.
Right.
But the basic Sheirish he's talking about here now is that it's higher than the Makar of Moichin of Bina in the Midos. Then in other words, there's a certain thing of Bina, the Bechain comes into it, which means, so therefore I like him, or therefore I hate him. And then the Bechain has a life itself. So who mepchinas a makif the Bina, but this external of Bina really has a sheirish in the makif of Bina and the Mem Stuma. The B'chinat Mem Stuma and Nal V'Dal. In other words, really the Chashmal is really higher than the Moichin altogether. Okay. Lahavin Zeh B'Tosefes Biur Hari Adush Zeh Gamken Sheirish Inyan HaMasholet. This is also the Inyan of the Marshal. My Gimel Meos Mashal der Meir Chulu Sheirish HaMashal Lemala Min HaNimshal. Mo Mishle Shloimeh. So the Gimel, there's the 300 allegories of Reb Meir. I think the 300 allegories of Reb Meir is the 3 Alamas Biyah, and the 3,000 is up in Atilus already.
Right.
Shesherish HaMashal L'mala Min HaNimshal Mo Mishle Shloimeh Shehen Chochmes Amukas B'Yosef She'en Lahem B'chinas Kelim B'Oisius, that you cannot just put the seichel into a keli, just in letters to say the thing itself, this chochma itself. Dafka, when you enclose it into a totally different thing that's separate from the etzma chochma, like in a mashal of a gashmus, sham dafka yusag oimek ha-chachma, mo sheyuchul lahasig oimek ha-seichel rak al yedei ha-mashal dafka. So Yusa Gam Beribu Yehesbet Dvarim, that even if you explain it, you couldn't explain it. And Davka through the mashal. So a mashal should nasa lefi oifen an nimshal Davka, Rebbe Chreach shiyasik la'emek u'mokar moitza ha-nimshal. In order to come up with a mashal Gashmi that is according to the Oifen HaNimshal, it means that he has to understand the Oimek HaMokar of the Nimshal even better than somebody who actually understands the Nimshal itself. Ve'im lo yekavin HaMoshal HaNimshal klal, then the Moshal will not be able to be mekavin properly to the Nimshal kiyadua. Im ken sheirish HaMoshal b'mokar seichel HaNimshal u'lamala himenu. So therefore, that the Sheirish HaMashal is in the Mokar of the Seichel HaNimshal. Otherwise, if you didn't know the Mokar of the Seichel HaNimshal, you couldn't make the Mashal. Not only that, it's really higher than it. Because there could be a person who understands the Makar Mutza a Nimshal, but will not be able to make a mashal. Davka Shloimeh can make a mashal. He's even smarter.
Right.
So they Amar Divrei Chachamim v'Chidaisam, like they're
the riddles
or mashals, right? So let's be erech emek u'makor hachochma kach erech hachidus u'mashalim. One mashalim the mayor mashalim the mishlei shloimeh k'masham v'or makam machabinim v'daber gimel alofim mashal. Dahainu mashal le-mashal. Not 3,000 different mashals, but a mashal on a mashal 3,000 times. Bazayar shenimtza b'mashal achan yeser, that you see that in the final mashal, which is totally megusham, sham hu ha'emek v'amakar hayot rishon shel hanimshal. Davka there, it's higher than even the depth of the nimshal itself. And by the way, this is also the thing of the Shvira is also comes in Mashalim, where basically somebody takes the mashal literally.
Right.
And doesn't realize that it's a mashal. And this is what happened with the Avodah Zaras, like a cow and stuff like that.
Right.
Or like a father, that a God is a father. The father and the mother and stuff like that. So people came up with, they misunderstood the mashal, or like it says Shemesh U'Mogen, so they started praying to the sun.
Right.
Or like even now, like if you look at the Eastern religions, they actually think it means a light.
Right.
They say a light, a white light or something like that.
Right.
And it really does mean a light, because even Ora Chochma doesn't mean a light.
Right.
Chochma is not a light like this light. Anybody understands that? That's Ora Chochma. But nonetheless, people, when you say the Orein Seif, they literally think it means like a light, but from a very big light bulb.
Right.
Not just a regular light bulb, but a sodium light bulb. Like they have the street lights,
Right.
And most people think a mamish means light. They don't understand that the whole thing, and even like the spiritual, they don't really realize that the spiritual doesn't mean spiritual. That even the thing of like the spirit in the body, it doesn't mean that the Eibusher is like spiritual.
Right.
It's a muscle. Dahainu mashal l'mashal k'moshem v'or bazar shenimtza mashal achan yeter sham hu ha'emek v'amakar yeter rishon shel mashal hu v'kol zeh hu gam ken b'shoyesh pinas ha'esis. The same thing in the shoyesh of pinas ha'esis. Shal yodam davka yusag heitev or ha'seichel hu. The davka through the ha'esis and explanations, the depth of the light of the seichel will be understood. And that's the basic thing of the Rosh Mashiach, that it dafka will be machal the infinite light.
Right.
Ukmoiken yuvan beinyan akshama shel oira seichel kol sheba ba'asoga v'hesper ba'akshama b'yesel amata mata sham davka pchinas ha'emek v'amokar shel guf pnimis oira seichel hu. The more farther down you can explain it, the more it shows how smart he is. In other words, somebody who can explain it farther down, it means he had to understand it farther up.
Right.
V'hainu gam ken pchinas chitzoni es bina shemizeh na'aseh pchinat labusha hashmal de bina. And this is also what is called the chitzoni es bina. Means that from chitzoni es bina comes the actual thing through the malchus atvuna to come into the letters of an actual explanation. Meaning that when this explanation becomes an explanation, it can become a separated thing out from the actual seichel. When it's a chashmal and it gets put into oisius, you can mamish write it down. Like what's happening over here, that this book is written down. It's a chashmal.
Right.
And this is what it says, Vayas Kutnas Or. But Kutnas Or is dafka from the Shvira.
Right.
That in other words, that once he has the Bechain, so the Bechain goes and becomes the Moichin for the Midos, and he knows that he likes this thing, and it keeps the Midah, but he doesn't have to go through a whole Hitbonenut. He just made the decision that he likes it, and that becomes the Moichin for the Midah.
Right.
And this is like the placenta for a baby. It's a klipa. In general, it's in the klipas. But when it comes into tikkun, then it becomes kutnas or with an aleph. That it not only it doesn't cover it up, but it actually clarifies it. Okay,
but let me just ask you, the mashal still remains, but now the nimshal is mayor in the mashal.
Yeah.
The lavush is still
in
there.
Other words, the mashal can be two things. It can, if you think that the mashal is the actual thing, then it becomes kutnas or that it actually covers up on the nimshal.
Right.
And you pray to the sun.
Right.
If you understand that it doesn't mean actually the light of the sun, but it's a mashal. So then it can actually clarify the nimshal. And dafka through the mashal you see the nimshal. Then it becomes Christmas or with aleph.
Right.
I think he's going to talk about that in the next chapter. That's the Kalaria Meira and stuff like that. Ubeinyan besholom eitis malbush. Ubeinyan schach de sukkah ka'agavnu v'dayla maven. And this is basically, he's telling you various places in Kabbalah where it talks about these inyanim. V'dayla maven. So, the basic thing here is that it's the atheists when they don't hold the seichel, then they break up and it becomes a big bilbul, and that's the union of the toihu. And when the atheists do hold the seichel, that's dafka when the seichel is mityashev, and that's dafka how you can get the seichel. It's dafka through the atheists. And this is basically the Indian, like what he's going to explain later, of how the Golas will be straightened out. That the Golas is like a cholam where there's a big bilbul, and what comes along is Yosef plays a chalomis that he says what goes where. He gives the pitron of the chalomis. And basically what they said that the Mittler Rebbe was Mashiach ben Yosef. Yosef plays a chalomis. And basically that's the thing that we're doing, that we're putting all these things in order.
Right.